do you regret that fighting jet were not supplied before counteroffensive operation of Ukraine? That
Of
now
course I
Ukrainian.
regret it. I mean, of course, with our superiority, this counteroffensive would probably be successful already. I mean, I think it's going to be successful still. I think the slow push, the Ukrainians know what they're doing. They've proven us wrong on every single count over and over and over again. They've wildly exceeded expectations on everything. They've exceeded expectations in the use of our weapons. They've exceeded expectations in the ability to regain their territory. And I think it's going to happen again. I really have no doubt. But of course, if we'd given more weapons earlier, Ukraine would have already won the war. A lot of Ukrainians would be alive today who are not. For them, the war is already over. And, I mean, it's a horrible, horrible regret, I think, of mine. I think of the United States, of course, of Ukraine, of you and the Ukrainian people. I mean, it's sickening. Our hesitancy has cost Ukraine a lot. I mean, thank God that we haven't been more hesitant. I mean, you can always say it could have been worse. It could have been worse, but it could have also been a lot better.
Do you? I know that in the United States the election campaign is almost launched, and a lot of people they begin campaign, maybe not officially, but in reality. What do you think? Do you see some threat after election for the Ukraine if it's in case of changing the administration, the presidency, the administration?
Yeah, I mean, look, the presidential election's still a long way off. I mean, there's a lot of time for Ukraine to win this war. I mean, I think that if Ukraine cuts down to the Azov Sea, the war, that Russia's days are numbered, basically. I mean, I don't think anyone expects Ukraine to win the war outright with this counteroffensive. I mean, that is also a possibility. But, once the Land Bridge is cut, once the Kerch Bridge is gone, Russia's ability to resupply its already diminished military forces is limited. So I think that Ukrainian victory is kind of on the way. My ideal, I think everyone's ideal, is that Ukraine wins the war this year. We'll see. But I think it is going to be before the next presidential election. I really do. I'll also say that, with regard to the positions of parties and politicians, things change a lot in the time of an election. And congressional support, which is really the beating heart of our democracy, has been 100% steady behind Ukraine. And I think we expect it to remain 100% steady. We've already provided Ukraine, quite a lot of, $100 billion of support. 30 billion of that about has been for direct arms, which is terrific. Others been kind of NATO support and direct budgetary assistance and things like this. And I anticipate that when we get to a point that a new congressional spending bill will have to be arranged, it will happen. At this point, the administration has not proposed a new spending bill. They say they're going to do it around September, but they say they have what they need right now. So, and that's, I mean, there's other things in our back pocket too, with how we could get Ukraine supplies and arms and things like that. But I really, I mean, I hope the war isn't going to continue until the presidential election. I mean, I really, really hope that. I mean, I hope, I don't like this language, as long as it takes. I think I've kind of made that clear before. I mean, I understand what people mean by that. They mean we're going to keep supporting Ukraine until Ukraine wins, ideally. But then they don't say wins. Like I would rather just say we're for Ukrainian victory, and we're going to help achieve it as quickly as possible. That's a better term in my mind, as quickly as possible rather than as long as it takes.
You are the part of Helsinki Commission. Do you feel that spirit of Helsinki Act alive? And what do you think about OCCA organization should it be changed? Maybe some reforms or all these structures, they are alive or not?
Yeah, I mean, look, we had a delegation of Baltic parliamentarians recently, Central and Eastern European parliamentarians plus the UK, and one of them basically said, "Look, the spirit of Helsinki is dead," and I think that's right. I mean, I think that what a lot of international law is built on, kind of the idea of reciprocal arrangements, is gone because Russia is breaking everything it's ever signed up to. Russia is attempting to destroy the very concept of international law by basically flouting it in every single way and then saying, like, look, no one's stopping us. What are you going to do about it? And the more the law is broken without repercussion, the less power the law has. And we've allowed Russia to get away with this for a very long time, which is why, we let them get away with it in Georgia. We let them get away with it in the initial invasion of Ukraine. We let them get away with it in Syria. Okay. So the more this happens, there's so many times we let them get away with it, right? The more Russia feels confident that it can just keep breaking international law without any consequences. And that's why it ultimately felt comfortable going for the jugular and attempting the restoration of the Russian Empire, or the Soviet Union, which really was just the Russian Empire. So, but attempting the restoration of the Russian Empire via this blitzkrieg on Kyiv. I don't think these things are dead, only because if we defeat Russia, we resurrect them, essentially. The Ukrainian defeat of Russia, Ukrainian victory and Russian defeat gives credence back to these values. It basically says, no, you can't get away with everything. These things matter. You need to hold to your commitments, or else you will be defeated. You will be isolated. You will be destroyed. And that is the enforcement mechanism, ultimately, for international law. So it's not just the sovereignty of Ukraine on the line, which is enough, right? That's enough if it were the sovereignty of Ukraine. It's not just Ukraine stopping a world war, because of course restoring the Russian Empire doesn't just mean taking Ukraine. It means taking the Baltic states. It means taking Poland. It means taking Georgia, and so on and so forth. It also means the survival of international law and potentially the restoration of international law, because those who flout international law will finally, maybe for the first time in the new century, be punished. And that, creates a deterrence effect. It means that people like Xi Jinping, who would like nothing more than to invade Taiwan, would like nothing more than to flout international law in every way, will finally have to look at himself and say, oh, there's going to be consequences for this. I better not.
You are very active in your Twitter. Do you have some problem because of it, or you could write whatever you want in your Twitter account?
That's a funny question. Yeah, I have problems because of everything. It's hard. You're running up against a consensus that failed. Effectively, it's hard to exist and to fight in an environment where the resting notion, the status quo, got us into this mess. Okay. DC is a risk-averse city. The last 30 years, we have been obsessed with the idea of liberal triumphalism, the idea that democracy will just achieve itself, will defend itself automatically. There's been corrupt networks that have spanned the globe, integrating autocracies with democracies. And I'm against all of this. I don't believe any of this. I believe to defend democracy, you have to wake up every day and defend democracy. I think eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. I think tyrants are always out to destroy us. And we have to make them scared of us. And that's the only way that it stops. This is not a popular notion. Nobody likes to hear this. We have kind of conditioned ourselves to believe that everything's hunky-dory and everything's fine and everything's going to be fine and don't worry about it. We don't even need weapons anymore. You know, I mean, it's a very backwards mentality. And I think it's born of, I mean, it's born in part of the surprise victory in the Cold War, right? I mean, it's born, if you really want to come down to how we ended up here, you got to go back to 1991, when the Soviet Union, I mean, the Russian Empire, just our great rival in the world, collapsed out of nowhere. I mean, it's almost like, what the heck happened? I mean, they just fall apart. And then we kind of came to believe that, oh, everything's going to be fine. We can't screw up anymore. We're the unilateral superpower, and that's it. But I mean, it's hard to beat on the door and tell people that the barbarians are at the gates, that the wolves are at the door, and that we're in a lot of trouble. Particularly also because there's this notion that, well, America, it's funny that it's coupled with this, but that, well, America hasn't done everything right, and blah, 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 blah. And our own democracy is in trouble. And there's a lot of truth to these sorts of things too. I don't want to like completely dismiss them, but that doesn't mean that we can stop defending ourselves. And it doesn't mean that we can, ignore the enormous threat posed by tyrants around the world. So, to come back to your question, I mean, it gets me in trouble all the time. I like to think about it as, John Lewis, famous civil rights activist and representative, encouraged people to get into good trouble. And that's how I like to see it. It's good trouble. I mean, I'm on the right side of history. I know that. Ukraine is on the right side of history. Ukraine knows that. Our countries in the West have stuck their heads in the sand and been inundated by foreign corruption for a very long time. It's going to be very difficult to purge, but somebody's got to try.
What do you think about the future of frozen Russian assets? I have talked with a lot of experts, and they almost all of them, they were a bit skeptical toward the possibility to send this money to Ukraine without Russian acceptation of this move. They said all that it's possible, but if Russia decided to do it voluntarily as reparation or something else, what do you think? Is it possible to take this money without concession of conceal of Russia?
Yeah. Okay. So one, Russia will never do it voluntarily. Russia is going to have to be isolated after Ukrainian victory for a very long time. It's going to be kind of probably a North Korea or Iran kind of scenario where we just have to keep them out of the international system. We can't make the same mistake of 91 and attempt to reintegrate them because they just took advantage of us. I mean, we did everything we could to help Russia transition to a normal country, and they absolutely spit in our face. And we can't allow that to happen again. We got too close. This was, like I said, this was almost a world war. If Ukraine hadn't fought, it would have been. So we have to be extremely cautious around Russia. Two, the Congress, actually, both chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives, on a bipartisan basis, Democrats and Republicans, recently introduced a piece of legislation that had been in the works for like a year now, that will provide the authority to confiscate these assets. It is sponsored in the House by the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee and in the Senate by the ranking member, that is the highest ranking in the minority party, the Republican on the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee. So there's a very good chance. I mean, it's got as good a chance as anything to pass Congress. So, I mean, we're moving forward with this. The G7 appears like there's actual language on this. I know last time we checked with the EU wasn't quite there, but they had gotten there on this idea of like taking the money and then investing it and using the kind of the proceeds of that investment to give to Ukraine. But I think we're actually all going to come around to confiscating the assets. I mean, this is the thing about international law is once you violate everything, remember, international law's core is this notion of reciprocity, that countries should treat one another on an equal basis. We have let Russia get away with basically throwing this in our face for a very long time, violating everything while we respect their protections under international law. And that needs to finally end. We need to finally say, we're going to use this, another classic of international law, the notion of countervailing measures, which is to say, you violated all of international law, so you are no longer under the protections of international law to take this money. It's very important that it be done under the auspices of international law, and that it basically be done with partners and so on and so forth, because the power of the dollar is very important. The dollar underpins the global economy, and it's also, I mean, it's good that it's the currency of a democratic society. It's one of the reasons why it underpins the global economy. So we don't want to do anything that will make people believe that a confiscation of this sort is in any way unlawful. But that's why we anticipate this kind of legal change, plus an international coalition, plus a very strong legal memo. And then, of course, the General Assembly of the United Nations has already voted on a huge basis to provide reparations to Ukraine. So, I mean, I think it's going to get done. I mean, I think we can do it. It's just again, the timing is a problem, right? This should have been done a while ago. Ukraine needs this money.